During war, everybody in the country is involved and directly affected, not just the soldiers and the high leaders that are actively participating in the front lines. War usually only paints a picture of the battles that were fought, the heroes on the front lines, and the strategic decisions of leaders. However, behind these images lies an almost untold narrative from those who are not on the front line. Wives, mothers, and daughters were left behind and had to bear the burden of maintaining the home front. And these silent warriors faced an equally devastating reality. In the shadows of the Second World War, while men were dispatched to fight far away from home, women were tasked with an Herculean challenge to keep their homes, communities, and even the entire economy running. They were the backbone that not only kept the country running, but at the same time supported their nation at war, and still their heartbreaking stories are almost never told. That's why today we are taking a look at the sad truth women faced during the Second World War and dive deep into the tasks they had, the challenges they faced, and the unspeakable things that happened to them. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Past Perspectives so you can learn about all the history topics you have never learned about in school. To understand the roles of women, we first have to look at how differently countries have changed their structures in times of war. After men were dragged into war in countries far away, back home life in towns and cities changed radically as well. During that time in most societies, women traditionally had the task to take care of their homes and children. Only a few of them were actually working, and this only in industries that were considered as suitable for women, such as the textiles and healthcare industry. However, as the world was dragged into a war, these societal norms shifted, sometimes violently. Women were propelled into roles and responsibilities that were usually done by men before the war started. In places like the United States and Britain, the absence of men in the workforce opened up opportunities for women. They became the primary earners and the backbone of their respective societies, working in factories, offices, and farms. They were not only the proverbial homemakers, but also the breadwinners, keepers of the economy, and wardens of morale. The image of Rosie the Riveter symbolized this shift in America. If you don't know who Rosie the Riveter is, she's an iconic symbol of the American home front during World War II. Representing the women who worked in factories and shipyards, she embodied female empowerment and signaled the change in societal roles for women during the war period. In these countries, women overtaking the jobs of their men was also seen as a sign of the freedom and independence women could have. However, the experience was not the same in the rest of the world. In countries under occupation such as France and Poland, or in the heartlands of the Axis power, Germany and Italy, the situation was way harsher and more brutal. Their contribution to the war was not seen as female empowerment, but they were expected to contribute to the war effort, and this often under forced labor conditions. What made this situation even harder was the heartbreaking reality of their homes turning into centers of the war, so they were facing the brutality of the war firsthand. In total, we have to see the insane amount of workload women had during this time. They were expected to keep taking care of the home and children while at the same time doing the jobs men left behind to keep the economy running. This made the socioeconomic situation even more complicated, as wealthier women could sometimes escape the realities of war. But the majority, to be more exact the working class, had no such luxury. They faced long working hours, dangerous conditions, and the constant fear of losing their loved ones. Now, the situation of women doing double the workload didn't make their situation any better. With the war getting worse with every day, women were working more and getting less than before. Rationing started taking full effect since governments worldwide started restrictions on everyday things such as food, clothing, and fuel. And while this has been exhausting behind imagination, the toll of the war was not just physical, it was profoundly emotional. The sense of uncertainty loomed over everyday life, punctuated by news from the battlefront and the agonizing wait for letters from loved ones. Every letter and every piece of news from the battlefields brought fresh fear. Each knock on the door could bring the worst news you could imagine, the loss of a husband, a brother, or a son. At this time, no one was there to help them, and women were left to grapple with this grief alone. Therefore, they carried the weight of loss while at the same time trying to maintain a facade of strength for the sake of their children and their communities. Women were suddenly thrown into the role of both mother and father. They had to navigate a world designed for men, taking on tasks they had never done before, from household repairs to financial management. Many women also shouldered the responsibility of tending to their farms or family businesses alone. Yet, despite the challenges, they showed resilience and determination that would become a defining characteristic of this generation of women. If we look at the work women had to do, it was far from what today is believed to be fair. Despite their significant contribution to the war effort, women were paid significantly less than their male counterparts. In fact, the wage gap was so wide that women often earned less than half of what men did for the same job. Please keep in mind that the situation I'm describing is mainly the situation women faced in the heart of Europe during the Second World War, but there have also been cases where it happened in Britain or the US. On top of the miserly payments, they were often relegated to more dangerous and physically demanding jobs such as working in munition factories where they were exposed to toxic chemicals without any safety measures that would protect them from any harm. What made this even worse, their work was often undervalued and dismissed as women's work. As we discussed before, the societal norms at the time has seen the women's role in the home, and therefore their work was not seen as valuable. This lack of recognition and respect, coupled with poor working conditions and low wages, made the situation even more challenging. But amidst these disheartening scenarios, women have often shown incredible resilience and left indelible marks. One such woman was Naomi Parker Fraley, who is now said to be the real-life inspiration behind Rosie the Riveter. Naomi was a factory worker at the Naval Air Station in Alameda, California. Despite the grueling work and lack of recognition, Fraley, like many other women, soldiered on, proving that they were not only capable, but essential to the war effort. These women were not just keeping the home fires burning, but they were also stoking the fires of industry and agriculture, playing a pivotal role in their nation's victory. Unfortunately, a lot of these brave roles in history only get their credit in retrospect, and not while they show the world what they are capable of. See, here at Past Perspectives, we do not just want to show you the same information you got in history class. We want to show you more than just the dates and facts. We want to show you the people and their experiences behind it. Now, if we jump back to the heart of the war in Europe, the situation of women, especially those near to the battlefields, worsens with every passing day. It's a gruesome reality that war has always had a horrifying impact on civilians, but the distressing plight of women in conflict zones often gets overlooked in the grand narratives of war. As the war rolled on, rape and sexual abuse became terrifying weapons of war used to inflict psychological trauma, humiliation, and the satisfaction of the lowest of desires. Women of all ages faced unspeakable atrocities, often falling into the hands of occupying forces. For instance, it's estimated that up to 2 million German women were raped by Soviet soldiers as the Red Army invaded Germany in the closing stages of the war. This is not single out to the Soviets, as there are also countless stories of sexual violence by German soldiers during their occupation of their territories. But it wasn't just physical violence that played a role here. Women were also forced into having survival sex, where they needed to exchange their bodies for food, shelter, or protection for themselves or their families. This was one of the most horrific forms of exploitation that took advantage of women's desperate situations. And these nightmares didn't end with the end of hostilities. Many women held these scars of war in their bodies and minds forever, often without any psychological support or even a little acknowledgement of their suffering. Pregnancies resulting from rape, sexually transmitted diseases, and the emotional trauma of sexual violence haunted these survivors long after the guns fell silent and the war was over. And even though there have been countless cases of crimes that were committed against women, justice was not present for them. Looking at the war crime trials, they very rarely addressed sexual violence, and they even tried to downplay, normalize, or even hide these abuses. Therefore, most of these soldiers went unpunished, while the victims were often stigmatized and even expelled from their communities, which lead these women to bear a shameful silence about their stories for years or even decades after the war. The impacts of the Second World War were long-lasting on women. Both physically and mentally, they went through unimaginable horrors. From the trauma of sexual violence, the toll of grief, loss, and the strain of working in hazardous conditions with minimal acknowledgments and no one addressing the issues they went through. After the war, it was incredibly hard to return to the pre-war societal norms, as women who had taken up roles in the workforce were often expected to return to domestic lives. It doesn't matter if it was because of the newly found independence or because of the horrors they went through. These heartbreaking realities of women are often disregarded, and it extends far beyond what we can cover in minutes. If you are interested in hearing more about the fate of brave women during the Second World War, I have linked a video for you that talks about what happened to the women that decided to become soldiers and fight in the army, so make sure to check that out. Don't forget to subscribe to Past Perspectives, and with that being said, thanks for watching, and until next time.